on this day in 2021, a congregation of nursing nuns were branded a stain on Ireland's conscience. The Sisters of Bon Secours in Ireland offered their profound apologies for the treatment of the women and children who lived at their Tuam mother and baby home in County Galway on the 13th of January 2021. But what was this home? And how bad could a mother and baby unit be? Well, to explain that, we must go back to 1925, when the Bon Secours Mother and Baby Home, also known as St Mary's Mother and Baby Home, was opened in the town of Tuam, which chillingly means burial place. And I bring this up in a technique that we call foreshadowing. The building was a former workhouse, and it was to be a refuge for unmarried mothers and their babies. This home was one of 18 homes that would operate in Ireland over a period of 76 years, with an estimated 56,000 unmarried mothers and 57,000 babies passing through their doors. At the time, to be an unmarried pregnant woman was about one of the most shameful sins one could commit, which is rich when you consider the Catholic Church's colourful background in morally corrupt behaviour. The idea behind these maternity homes, such as the Tuam home, that opened up under the Catholic Church and quietly was supported by the Irish government, was that a pregnant woman or girl could go there to have her baby, stay for a year doing unpaid work to atone for her sin and support the institution that had so graciously cared for her in her time of need. Now, it didn't matter whether the pregnancy had occurred as a product of assault. The social stigma around being a fallen woman was so strong that families would send their daughters to these homes to sweep them under the carpet and avoid the shame and ostracisation that came along with it. Other women would be sent to these homes from their various schools, but a lot of people went there for the simple reason that they were destitute and they had nowhere else to go. Some tried to flee to England so that they'd be able to keep their babies, but unfortunately there was an agreement between England and Ireland to repatriate these people. The women and girls being sent to these homes ranged in age from 12 to 40. The youngest reported was 9 years old, but around 80% of people were aged between 18 and 29, with the average age being 23. And while these homes run by nuns sound like they could perhaps give a place to vulnerable people to be cared for and get back on their feet, dealing with such a tremendous life event within a supportive community away from the judgment of society, they were really anything but that. The reality was the aim of these institutions was punishment, with care being an afterthought, even if it was thought of at all. Despite having committed no crime, these women were not allowed to leave the home. They were sometimes given a different name to go by while they were in the institution, and they were encouraged not to speak about their lives in the outside world to preserve their anonymity. Their contact with the outside world was minimal, and when the time came for them to deliver their babies, there was little in the way of care or even sympathy. There may well have been some medical staff in attendance at the home, but the papal ban on nuns attending births or becoming midwives wasn't lifted until 1936, so certainly in the early days you were very much on your own. Mothers were kept separately from their children, and while they could leave after their year's service, their child would have to stay, if they managed to survive at all. A 1947 report on an inspection said that 12 of the 31 infants examined were described as being emaciated and not thriving. The infant mortality rates in these institutions was staggeringly high. 34% of children died in the home in 1943 and 27% in 1946. Adoption was illegal in Ireland until 1953, so any babies born before then would be put into industrial schools or orphanages, as they were sometimes insultingly called. Now, I know that I asked you to cast your mind back at the beginning of the video to 1925. The Tuam home closed its doors in 1962, but the last of these mother and baby homes closed their doors in 1998, so a lot of this is way more recent than you'd like to think. That is within my lifetime. Once adoption became legal, the church had to make money somehow, and they had a surplus of babies that Catholic families abroad would pay good money to love. Whether the actual loving parents of these children wanted it or not, at least 2,000 children were sold to families in the USA between 1940 and 1970. In the 1950s, adoptions happened to around 15% of all illegitimate children. The US newspaper The New Haven Register reported in 1955 that people were paying between $600 and $2,000 for children from Ireland, so that's between £5,000 and £17,000 in today's money. The homes were also being paid by the government to house these women and their babies. It was big business for the church. In the same report, the New Haven Register described the process for somewhat of these adoptions. To adopt a baby, the American soldier and his wife would travel to Dublin, where the wife checked into the nursing home as an expectant mother. An Irish woman would actually bear the child, but the birth would be registered in the name of the American. And that was it. Off they go. And as I said, in 1962 the Tuam home closed its doors, with inmates being sent to nearby homes. The building was demolished 10 years later in 1972, and a new housing estate was built on the site. 3 years later though, in 1975, two boys aged 10 and 12 were playing on the former site of the home when they found a home which they said was filled to the brim with children's skeletons. It was assumed that these were the corpses of stillbirths or from the Great Famine, so prayers were said on the site resealed, and insanely, no one thought to follow this up until 2012 when historian Catherine Corliss published an article about the home and at her own expense obtained the death certificates of all 726 children who had been recorded as dying there. She found that only 2 of these children had been buried in the local graveyard, which led her to conclude that the skeletons found by those 2 little boys over 30 years prior had belonged to the rest of these children. And it also transpired that the site which this mass grave was unwittingly discovered was the septic tank. The local Garda's initial statement about the discovery was that these are historical burials going back to famine times. There is no suggestion of any impropriety. On the 3rd of June 2015, the Irish Examiner published a special report in which the Health Services Executive noted that letters from the home were sent to parents of children asking for money for their upkeep, some of whom had died or been adopted out. A test excavation of the site was carried out between November 2016 and February 2017, confirming that the skeletons in the grave were not from the Great Famine, but from the 1920s to the 1950s. The Catholic Church in Ireland were obviously shocked and sad that this had happened, while in 2019 the Sisters of Bon Secours stated that they had no legal liability arising from the home, but that they would make a one-off donation of €2.5 million towards the excavation. The excavation and DNA testing of the babies began in June 2023 and is expected to take quite a while given the volume of people found in that mass grave. And yet still, the Church has a history of being uncooperative with providing records to the families torn apart by this cruelty in the name of godliness, preventing those families from being reunited or getting closure. The book Philomena by Martin Sixsmith is a heartbreaking story about those tied up in this. For many, this nightmare is current, not historical, and I hope that the perpetrators of such sick cruelty get the honest judgment that they deserve when they finally meet their maker. I'm sorry, this was a bit of a sad one today, but I do think that it is a story that really needs telling, so thank you for watching, why not subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow.